Hi folks. As I said in my little preview video, I'm super excited to do this book. But I do want to sort of warn that I'm hesitant to even call this a relaxation video, even though I'm going to do it in my usual style. And that's because some of the content here is a little disturbing, or could be disturbing. I mean, it is disturbing, let's be honest. It's representing a time. Things are challenging, a lot going on, and I'm not going to leave those parts out. A lot of ASMR videos, we kind of skip past that stuff, and I'm not going to do that today. So I'm just going to read from this little from the jacket cover. It's a story about clothes, but it's also a story about freedom, both individual and collective. It's a story about a generation of people challenging the status quo, struggling for racial equality and civil rights. From the most avant-garde jazz musicians, visual artists, and poets to the most influential architects, philosophers, political leaders, and writers, Black Ivy explores for the first time ever the major role this particular style of clothing played during this period of aspiration and upheaval, and what these clothes said about the people who wore them. So, again, I'm going to go ahead and do this in my usual style, and I'm not going to leave those parts out. So just be a little warned that some of the parts in here might be challenging to get through. But the photos are fantastic. The style is fantastic. And in the end, there were a lot of victories in this period. So with that, let's jump right in. It's called Black Ivy, a Revolt in Style. And I'm mostly going to it's got some great photos. I haven't read this book cover to cover, but I've skimmed through. I haven't necessarily preset, particular pages, but other than a few things I know I want to grab or talk about. So this is the subtitle of the book, A Revolt in Style. Style is about the freedom to be oneself, to authentically express oneself, and in doing so reject limitations imposed by others. A consciousness of style, in essence, emerges when one asserts one's right to self-definition and the right to take control of one's own identity. The little section here says, synonymous with the civil rights movement, this raised seam, wool jacket, tab collar shirt, medallion pattern tie, and pin badge combination is also a neat shorthand for Black Ivy. And I'll jump to this paragraph. Dressing in Ivy style was not new to black society. In places like Washington, Chicago, New Jersey, and Harlem during the years between the First and Second World Wars, many black professionals wore the Ivy look of the day. So that's where the Black Ivy name comes from in the title. This is keeping things cool. Keeping things cool, it's almost impossible to understand the continued relevance of the Ivy style without taking into account the influence black culture had on the look in the late 1950s and 60s. And I said this was a cool book. It's quite literally, this section is called The Birth of Cool. That's John Coltrane. arriving at Schiphol Airport in 1960. He was in Amsterdam for a series of concerts with Miles Davis, looking every inch the seasoned traveler in a soft ivy jacket, candy-striped button-down, and a woolen cardigan. It's a little cold today. I'm wearing a cardigan myself. We had a huge heat wave last week, and now it's fall. It's fully here, and it's a little chilly. It's something like chilly for me anyway. I think it's like a 40-degree change in temperature over a couple of days. The Last King of America, How Miles Davis Invented Modernity. That was the writer Gerald Early's title for a 3,000-word piece that he wrote on Miles Davis. In this moody photograph by Jean-Pierre Leloir, Davis wears a beautiful florid patterned button-down with a plain tie under an immaculately tailored suit. His attitude was a big influence on the Ivy community. Isn't that a great picture? Look at that corduroy. In literature, the vanguard of word and sound. The style of Ted Jones, like his poetry, links beat culture to an emerging black consciousness. His beret, a classic signature of the Beats, along with the disheveled style of his clothes in both images, is unquestionably beat. The beat look, the beat generation. Leroy Jones, the playwright, poet, renowned jazz aficionado, intellectual, and political activist, was ever moving forward. But with all those changes, his style often had a classic air to it. It might even be ascribed to librarian or college professor. Such was its iconic bookishness. This is 1964. Ellison. Like many black Ivyists, Ralph Ellison had a seemingly conservative dress code, which might appear to run at odds with his modernist, consciousness-shifting creative output. That is, until you realize that resolving this existential dichotomy is at the very heart of his work. Invisible Man is about a search for identity and the fundamental need for self-definition, published in 1952. There's an old Esquire cover. James Baldwin tells us all how to cool it this summer. James Baldwin tells us all how to cool it this summer. This is James Baldwin. Black people can refrain from rioting or cool it, to use the common term of the time, in a response to the assassination of King. How can we get the black people to cool it? Esquire asks. It is not for us to cool it, Baldwin replies. But aren't you the ones who are getting hurt The most, says Esquire. No, Baldwin says. We are only the ones who are dying fastest. I mean, his words seem to get more and more relevant over time. Alex Haley, co-author of Malcolm X's autobiography, writer of the groundbreaking and somewhat controversial book Roots, and possibly the only Playboy journalist ever to be interviewed by the magazine. In the arts, becoming your own witness. Noah Parafoy created this work from found objects, taking Duchamp's seminal credo of the ready-made and developing epic pieces of stature and beauty. Charles White, Jacob Lawrence, a lot of these photos from the 60s. You could have told me they were from 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. It'd still work, I'd believe you. Very timeless. Gordon Parks. Gordon Parks, looking dapper as Dan, sporting a cravat under his soft button-down shirt and jacket. On this one, photographed here in the mid-60s with Italian model Benedetta Barzini, Parks' style looks as relevant today as it did then. So true. Don Hogan Charles, a photographer. Ted Williams, dressed in classic military style. Trench coat was like Don Hogan Charles, a legendary photographer. He not only shot for Ebony, Playboy, and Life and took images of some of the world's greatest musicians, including Billie Holiday and Dizzy Gillespie. He also excessively covered the civil rights movement. In music, New Dawn for the Bohemian Knights. Miles Davis. Outside the legendary jazz club Cafe Bohemia in Greenwich Village in 1956. Miles Davis looking pensive in the 30th Street Studio, New York City during the recording of the album Kind of Blue. Davis is wearing a long-sleeve pop-over button-down with a cravat and cross-pocket slim pants. That's this photo. And in this one, Davis wears another classic ivy pop-over, this one in a soft jersey fabric. Here's a quote from Miles Davis: "But you've got to have style in whatever you do, writing, music, painting, fashion, boxing, anything." The man in the green shirt. Miles Davis was the embodiment of hip coolest man on the planet during his ivy-suited period. Davis was christened the Warlord of the Wegians by the great Esquire magazine style commentator George Fraser. This is obviously the same photo as the cover. The man in the green suit. Shirt, I'm sorry. The man in the green shirt. Thelonious Monk. If Miles Davis had the green shirt and Jimmy Smith the excellent sweaters, then Thelonious Monk had the glasses and hats. Cover of his 1957 Riverside album. That's this one, Monk's Music, in the wagon. And this one, the genius of modern music wearing a fur hat as only he can. John Burke's Dizzy Gillespie. Dizzy's style of dress included his more conservative later years influenced generations of fans. On this side, this picture, he's wearing a traditional candy-striped ivy button-down shirt with skinny tie. In this one, a jazzy batik patterned sports jacket, completing the look with a crazy pipe. Billy Taylor. Two sides of Billy Taylor. On this one, on the left, a relaxed Mr. T in a classic set of ivy threads. And in this one, the formal side of Billy Taylor at his piano wearing a beautiful blue-gray suit. The Modern Jazz Quartet. The Modern Jazz Quartet's Percy Heath creates an intellectual mood wearing a bell-sleeve alpaca cardigan over a shirt and tie. And in this photo, an early 60s ad for the mighty Hammond organ where the clothes managed to sell themselves. Bobby Hutcherson pushes the cardigan envelope out with a crew neck number with the Alpine style brushed wool and metallic buttons popular at the time. This is Grant Green. Grant Green adds his own twist with a shawl collar knit. Eric Dolphy. Dolphy's threads were second to none. He never looked better than wearing this timeless shawl collar cardigan, a good alternative to a jacket, plus the woolen watch cap. They are Ivy Knitwear Classics. I've got a sweater kind of like that. Taking 5 in the batik short sleeve button down shirt surrounded by his array of instruments. Legions of Ivy pilgrims bought this album just for the cover, simply because the quartet looks so sharp. This excellent 1960 Atlantic album was photographed by Lee Friedlander. Ornette Coleman. Coleman poses for a portrait holding his beloved yellow plastic Sylmore alto saxophone. He's wearing a classic crew neck with contrast color around the neckline, known as tipping. John Coltrane. This photo, Coltrane looks every inch a template for the Ivy look, wearing a soft shouldered jacket, button-down shirt, and knitted tie. In this photo, introduced into the U.S. in the early 50s by shirt makers Hathaway, the natural softening of the color in the Madras print that takes place over time with these shirts, much like denim, was as much a selling point for the mainstream as it was for the black Ivyists. As a textile, it was tenacious, weathering the winds of change and surviving intact nonetheless. Quincy Jones. There are really two tried and tested elements that have become the epitome of the Ivy look, and that is shirts and shoes. In this picture, the genuine ivy-clad composer wearing a very cool pin-collared shirt. These days, this collar style is as rare as hen's teeth. In this photo, Q has on a pair of plain front Florsheim Imperial Cordovan loafers. This model was called Yuma. They had a hand-sewn front, genuine moccasin construction with leather sole and heel. These loafers were a 60s Ivy classic. Got a dog barking in the neighborhood today. Billy Strayhorn. Wears a classic seersucker suit. It's the inevitable choice for the discerning musician when the temperature rises. Seersucker is cool, literally. In the 1930s, Brooks Brothers sold seersucker suits for $15. Sporting a very comfortable tweed sports jacket while concentrating on some sheet music. Art Blakely. Image from 1958. Jackie McLean, Sam Dockery, Bill Hardman, Jimmy Spanky DeBrest. Distinctive shirt styles. Sonny Rollins. This Blue Note album by saxophone Colossus Rollins was photographed by the peerless Francis Wolff. Rollins wears a white button-down shirt with a perfect roll to the collar. a relaxed Cecil Taylor wearing a definitive blue university striped button-down shirt, which was used on the cover of the 1959 album The Cecil Taylor Quartet Looking Ahead. Doesn't get much better. File under hip. That's very true. That pretty much defines hip right there, doesn't it? In film, scripting the flip. Sidney Poitier wearing the perfect ivy jacket, complete with patch, top pocket, and rip tie in the film. To Sir with Love. Slender Thread, 1965. This short sleeve popover shirt with an unbuttoned collar, worn with a t-shirt underneath, looks about as good as it gets. Night of the Living Dead. Greg Morris. Mission Impossible. Cool World, directed by Shirley Clark. Made in 1963 and tells the story of a young Harlem gang and the desire of its members to get out. In Schools, Lessons in Style. This is first day of any school. You want to make a good impression. Although no matter what these kids wore, you can be pretty certain that overall their welcome was anything but enthusiastic. Despite that, there they are in their black ivy best, a tie here, a pocket square there, and over there, a slightly oversized corduroy jacket. Newly enrolled in Maury High School in Norfolk, Virginia, a previously all-white school, 15-year-old Lewis Cousins, still in his McGregor windbreaker, wears a V-neck sweater and plaid camp collar shirt. Here. And a short collar button-down shirt, also plaid, in this photo. Hamilton Holmes, dressed in a shawl, collar, cardigan, button-down shirt, and desert boots. The goal of Black Ivies wasn't simply to subvert the style, it was to subvert the institutions that gave rise to the style itself. Harvey Gantt. Men of Morehouse. There are Ivy League colleges, and there are black Ivy League colleges, historically the most prestigious of them being Morehouse, Howard, and the Women's College Spelman. These and other historically black universities and colleges can count some of America's most influential black figures as alumni, then and now. They can also lay claim to championing the style of dress, combining traditional Ivy with elements of jazz and street style to create something totally authentic, and that looks more contemporary than their establishment counterparts do today. David Blackwell. In the City, fresh looks and familiar scenes. Ronald Fry and Marquette Fry. August 11th, 1965. They were involved in an incident that resulted in the death of 38 people. This photograph was taken later as the brothers attended court for sentencing 4 months after the riots. The findings of an official inquiry stated that the riots were triggered by a culmination of black residents' long-standing dissatisfaction with high unemployment, poor housing, and inadequate schools. Summer of 1965. The police and the National Guard stamped out the Watts riots, imposing curfews, emergency arrest powers, and extreme force. These typical Watts kids look cool with their individual style, combining sportswear, tailoring, and customization. Although the clothes look fresh, there's nothing unfamiliar about the scene itself. Bell-sleeved alpaca cardigans, Catalina windbreaker jackets, caps, plaid shirts, and high-water Levi's with 1-inch cuffs, or turn-ups, always hit the spot. Obviously, the desired look for these discerning young pilgrims was strictly Ivy. Groove Merchants, our man is wearing double button down. Not only has he got a button-down collar on his jacket, but he is also sporting a button-down shirt with superb roll on the collar and, to top it off, a killer pair of shades. There is one particular Italian word that is overused, but here is very apt. Sprezzatura. I don't think I'm saying that right. Young men gathering in a neighborhood in Chicago. Here, the mix of Ivy style is casual sportswear, indicates streetwear, looks of the future. In civil rights, who, what, and if not now, when? Martin Luther King Jr. While they detail the fly front raglan sleeve raincoat made popular by London fog, the shades on the gentleman on the left and the Prince of Wales check suit on the gentleman on the right mean they were also purveyors of black ivy. Malcolm X. X's pose in this photo is a fusion of elegance and defiance in typical Black Ivy style, as the pin-sharp focus of the lens lands on the crescent moon and star-clad hat. When it came to subverting the establishment dress codes, Malcolm X was way ahead of the game. The thing is, he looked so damn cool, whatever he wore. In many ways, the dress code of the Nation of Islam and that of the Civil Rights Movement was possibly all the two groups had in common at the time. One of their greatest tools was the self-published newspaper Muhammad Speaks, which was founded by the nation's ministers, including Malcolm X, pictured here, about to be distributed. Walter Fauntroy, Adam Clayton Powell. Black Ivyist virtually weaponized sunglasses in the period, from the subterranean nightlife of Miles Davis at the Cafe Bohemia to the front line of civil rights activity, as in this photo of civil rights leader Wyatt T. Walker. And this one, Al Hibbler wearing a fiercely formal pinned club collar shirt and tie. Bob Moses was the Zen-like mastermind behind the Freedom Summer of 1964, an epic voter registration drive that took place in the South's most committed segregationist state, Mississippi. Group of students wait to enter segregated restaurant. In short collar, button down, and Madras check jacket is Virginius Bray Thornton III. Although he and his cohort of college demonstrators were expelled from college for their actions, he would soon afterwards go on to become a founding member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Here he leads a group of fellow students in full battle dress, hopsacks, summer weight sports jackets, button-down shirts, and ties. Their destination, the whites-only lunch counter at Woolworth's. Thornton waits patiently to be served, or not, as the case may be. Non-reaction was the ultimate act of resistance. Each sitter had to undergo training to prep them for the experience, being called the N-word, having liquid poured over them, or, as in this image of Thornton, cigarette smoke blown in their faces, would only be the tip of the attack they would come to experience in real-life situation. Carrying a sign that says you can buy a $50 suit but not a 10-cent cup of coffee. The spark that ignited the Black Ivy style began to fade with the death of Martin Luther King in 1968. The force of conviction, King's dream, was based on the belief that African Americans could effect change in others by being examples of that change. When King died, many lost faith in that idea. Some became completely disillusioned, while others, members of the Black Panther Party, for example, became even more determined. This line is of mourners paying respect to King as his body lay in state at Spelman College, Atlanta, ahead of his funeral. In marches, the protest of a proud minority. The March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom in August 1966. August 1963. Civil rights leaders pose for a historic photograph in front of the Lincoln Memorial. A pinnacle moment in the history of the civil rights campaign, it's where Martin Luther King gave his I Have a Dream speech. Kids taking in the sights perched on the plinth of the Capitol monuments in Washington. An NAACP supporter wears an unbuttoned tab collared shirt. This style is part of that never knowingly underdress code that was inherent in the Black Ivy look. It was overtly neat and to the point of extreme, and while it tended to be worn by the mainstream in a formal business setting, it was simply worn whenever within the Black Ivy community. The curved edge of the club collar, the snap tab or button tab fastening that elevated the tie and kept it in place, showed a level of sophistication that to this day is off the chart. Harry Belafonte. This photo is Sidney Poitier and Harry Belafonte await the speeches at the March on Washington. This is marchers continue the message of peaceful protest. An old Ebony magazine cover. This one it's a look you're more likely to be familiar with on the subway or the city streets, but here's Dr. Elvin Poussaint, a renowned psychiatrist famous for his work exploring the effects of racism on black communities, marching from Selma to Montgomery in 1965. This one is an iconic image from the Selma-Montgomery marches on the cover of Ebony magazine. Got an airplane. Eddie C. Brown, dressed as elegantly as if he were going on a date, every detail considered, even the key line of his belt. This one, facing adverse weather in consummate style, wearing suitably oversized Macs and of course those all-essential hats. Within the world of mainstream Ivy clothing, workwear doesn't make the grade. Rooted in the elite Ivy League schools, workwear, denim, chambray shirts, dungarees, chore coats, and work boots were an anathema. But within the Black Ivy wardrobe, it has pride of place. During the Civil Rights period, when activists from the northern states went to the South to assist local branches of the SNCC and the Congress of Racial Equity, mobilize the local inhabitants' voting registration, it became obvious that wearing suits and ties while trying to gain the trust of local sharecroppers was not going to work. The elegant solution was to dress like the sharecroppers, not only by way of showing that they were prepared to help out with some farm work if it was required, but also demonstrating their support and solidarity to the outside world. By wearing these clothes, they were saying, yes, even farm workers in the remotest rural South have just as much right to vote, fair wages, and decent education as anyone else in the United States. C.T. Vivian, Andrew Young. Kirtland Cox, Marion Barry. A Steve Shapiro photograph of Martin Luther King linking arms with fellow marchers as a show of unity. An iconic image by Bruce Davidson of a marcher looking as relevant today as he did then. The bib and brace overalls he is wearing are by Sanforized, a brand co-owned at the time by Sanford Lockwood Clouet, the inventor of Sanforization, a process that transformed the denim industry. His company, Clouet, Peabody and Company, was also responsible for Arrow shirts. John Lewis. John Lewis, wearing his signature style of the period, tab collar shirt and tie, leads marchers through the streets. He would be one of the Big Six who helped organize the epic March on Washington. These images, taken some 50 years ago, inspired professional basketball players Colin Kaepernick and Eric Reed's silent protest on the sidelines during the playing of the U.S. national anthem before the start of every game in 2016. John Lewis and others takes the knee to demonstrate outside a whites-only swimming pool in Cairo, Illinois. Every new fashion is a form of rebellion. Sidney Poitier. Black Ivyists had no qualms about raiding supposedly forbidden wardrobes in order to affirm their status as equal citizens. Alongside him is Andrew Young, among others, all decked out in denim. Style-wise, this look is more evocative of the Buffalo Soldiers, the all-black cavalry and infantry regiments from the mid-1800s than the traditional images of the cowboy. Stokely Carmichael and Kwame Ture. Honorary Prime Minister of Black Panther Party. James Meredith had a goal to walk through Mississippi and inspire the silent majority to get on the electoral register, regardless of the extremely hostile environment to the huge risks involved. Soon, thousands of people would be walking the path planned by James, many of them, of course, dressed in black ivy, including camp collar-style shirts worn over white t-shirts. In politics, leaders cut from a different cloth. Andrew Hatcher. In 1960, Andrew Hatcher became the country's first black press secretary to the White House, appointed by the newly elected President John F. Kennedy. Edward William Brooke graduated from the Boston University School of Law. Member of the moderate liberal wing of the Republican Party, he went on to represent Massachusetts in the Senate between 1967 and 1979. Brooks would make history as the first Republican leader to call for the then President Richard Nixon to resign following the infamous Saturday Night Massacre. Here is Brooks wearing a three-piece suit and repp tie. Channing Phillips, 1968, wearing a seersucker jacket. He becomes the first African American to receive votes for the presidential nomination at a Democratic National Convention. Phillips had been Robert F. Kennedy's D.C. campaign manager. But following Kennedy's assassination in June 1968, the D.C. delegation proposed that he run as Kennedy's replacement. Cecil F. Poole, at 46 and a Harvard Law graduate, as he is sworn in by Chief U.S. District Judge Louis E. Goodman as U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of California. In sports, game changers, mavericks, and revolutionaries. This is, of course, Muhammad Ali. Oxford button-down shirt. Talk to anyone about Ivy style, and it's likely that the first thing they'll mention is the Oxford button-down shirt, an item of clothing appropriated from the British. Muhammad Ali, the day after he wins his first heavyweight championship against Sonny Liston, 1964. In this photo, doing a classic black ivy mix, an unbuttoned, button-down shirt and denim jacket. In this instance, a candy striped shirt with a Lee 91 bead jacket. Arthur Ashe. Ashe, photographed by John Zimmerman goes unrecognized in the New York subway the day after he won the U.S. Open in 1968. He looks the business in a uniquely 60s sport-inspired outfit in Ivy style. Notice the fine knit, short-sleeve V-neck jersey he layers over his shirt. On his feet are a fine pair of beef roll loafers, probably made by Sebago. Lou Alcindor, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. This is in the late 1960s, surrounded by a group of fans, along with the heavyweight champion of the world at the time, Muhammad Ali. Like the fans off the court, Alcindor wore black ivy. We had to be seen because we had to be heard. Tommy Smith. Tommy Smith and John Carlos. In advertising, somewhere at the end of the rainbow. Publications like Ebony served a black audience in the way that no mainstream publication could. But it took black Chicago ad man Tom Burrell in the late 60s to convince brands to create dedicated ads for the African American market. Until then, they simply replicated the mainstream white ads, replacing them with black models, as in these two photos. What's great about these ads are the clothes and the colorways. Demonstrating an aspirational field, they point to a simplified version of that dream that civil rights is trying to attain. Marlboro consistently advertised in Ebony magazine throughout the 60s using real athletes to sell their classic product line. Here, Ernie Banks relaxes in a suit with a presidential-style pocket square in his jacket and a pair of split-toe derby shoes, echoing the Black Ivy style. In this photo, another example of the one-size-fits-all approach applied by the finest ad agencies in the U.S. at the time. The Marlboro Man, originally created by agency Leobert in 1954, is still the brand's most iconic figure, a symbol of Wild West individualism. He made his way onto the pages of Ebony magazine no problem. Ebony had also run several stories about real-life African-American cowboys and ranchers, including Miles Davis's father, who imported premium hogs from Europe and was the second richest African-American in the state of Illinois. Today, this particular black cowboy might have met with a response similar to Lil Nas X, Old Town Road reactionary backlash, of course. More ads. Attempting to capitalize on the civil rights movement's adoption of denim and dungarees, Lee made a concerted effort to court the African American market. Here's a section about photographers. Well, I guess we've reached the end of this book. Some really fantastic photos in here. Well, I hope you enjoyed this look at this book, Black Ivy. I guess I'm supposed to ask you to subscribe if you're still out there. But either way, thanks for watching. I'll hope to see you soon.